Hello, children. Today, I'm going to tell you one amazing story about Princess Cinderella. Hey, kids, if you like to listen to our stories, then don't forget to follow our podcast. The story is going to begin. So listen carefully, children. There was once a gentleman who lived in a fine house with his kind and gentle wife and their pretty daughter. One day his wife died, so the gentleman married again with another lady. His new wife was not at all kind of pretty. She had been married before and had two daughters who were known behind their backs as the ugly sisters. Although they had no reason to be unkind, the two sisters were horrid to their new stepsister. They ordered her about, scolded her, and made her do all the work in the big house. Her clothes became ragged and thin and far too small. The poor girl was always cold and tired. In the evening, she would rest on a stool close to the fire, almost in the cinders and ashes. The stepsisters said when they saw her trying to keep warm, "Cinderella, that's the perfect name for you." Now the king and queen of their country had a son, and they planned a big party for the prince, in the hope that they might find a bride. Invitations were sent to all the big houses. When a large invitation card to the royal ball arrived at Cinderella's house, there was a great flurry of excitement. New dresses were chosen for the ugly sisters and their mother, and nobody talked about anything except the ball. One sister said, smiling at herself in the mirror, "I'm sure the prince will fall in love with me." The other one said, pushing her aside, "You silly fool, he won't be able to resist falling in love with me. Just think, one day I could be queen." And she pretended she was the queen already, as she ordered Cinderella to get another pair of shoes for her to try on. No one thought of asking Cinderella if she would like to go to the party. They scarcely even noticed her as they hastened around, trying on different wigs, fans, and gloves to go with their new ball dresses. At last, the day of the party came. Cinderella worked harder than ever, helping the ugly sisters and her stepmother to get ready. They quarreled with each other all day, and by the time the carriage drove away to the king's palace with all the family in it, Cinderella was glad to have some peace. But as she sat on her stool by the fire, she could not help a tear falling onto the ashes, for she wished that she could have gone with them. Suddenly she realized she was not alone. A beautiful lady stood before her with a silver wand in her hand. The beautiful lady said, "Cinderella, I am your fairy godmother. Tell me, what are those tears for?" Cinderella looked away. "I wish, oh how I wish, I could have gone to the party too." Her grandmother said, "So you shall. But first, we have some work to do. For if you are to go to the ball, I cannot send you as you are. Fetch me the largest pumpkin you can find in the garden." Cinderella fetched the largest pumpkin she could see, and with just the wave of her wand, her fairy godmother turned it into a gleaming golden coach. Her grandmother said, "Now we need a few horses. Look in the mousetrap and see if there is anything we can use." Cinderella ran to the ladder and found 6 mice running around in a cage. She watched her godmother wave her wand, and suddenly, harnessed to the coach, there were 6 shining dappler horses stamping their feet. Her godmother decided, "Those horses need a coachman. Look in the rat trap, Cinderella." There were 3 rats in the trap, and as the godmother touched the largest rat with her wand, it disappeared. But now, up at the front of the coach sat a fine, plump, whiskery coachman in a smart uniform. Her godmother said, "Go and look behind the water barrels, Cinderella. See if you can find something we can use for footmen." Cinderella ran to the water barrel and brought 2 lizards to her godmother. At the wave of her wand, they were transformed into splendid footmen. Her godmother, with a smile, said, "There now, Cinderella, your coach is ready. You will be able to go to the ball after all." Cinderella sighed. "How can I go like this?" And she looked down in despair at her ragged clothes and bare feet. Her godmother touched her with her wand. Her rags turned into a shimmering gown, and on her feet she was wearing the prettiest pair of glass shoes she had ever seen. As Cinderella stepped into the coach, her godmother gave her a strict warning. "Listen carefully. The magic will only last until midnight, and then everything will return to what it was before. Be sure you leave the ball before midnight, Cinderella." When Cinderella's coach arrived at the palace, the word went around that a beautiful lady had arrived in such a splendid coach, that she must be a princess. The prince himself came down the steps to greet her and led her to the ballroom. As they entered, the other guests fell silent in wonder, and the musicians stopped playing. The prince signaled the musicians to play again and danced with Cinderella. The prince stayed at Cinderella's side all evening. No one knew who she was. Not even the ugly sisters recognized her. Cinderella was so happy that she did not notice how quickly time was flying by. Suddenly she heard the clock strike the first stroke of midnight. With a cry, she left the prince and ran out of the party room. As she flew down the steps, one of her shoes fell off, but she could not stop picking it up. Although the prince tried to follow Cinderella through the crowd, he soon lost sight of her. He questioned everyone carefully, but no one had seen the beautiful lady leave. The guard said that the only person who had gone out was a young, raggedly dressed girl. No one noticed the pumpkin in the corner of the courtyard, or some mice, a rat, and a pair of lizards that slunk into the shadows. But the prince did find the glass shoe on the steps, and he recognized it as one of the most elegant shoes the mysterious and lovely lady had worn. The next day, the ugly sisters could talk of nothing But how beautiful the lady who had captured the prince's heart, and how she had disappeared so suddenly, and how no one knew her name. The palace issued a proclamation that the prince was looking for the lady who had worn the glass shoe. His servants would tour the country with it until they found the lady whose foot it fitted, and the prince would marry that lady. The prince traveled around with his servants, but time and again he was disappointed as the shoe failed to fit any lady's foot. At last, they came to Cinderella's house. The ugly sisters were waiting. One cried, holding out her foot, "Let me try," and pushing as hard as she could, but could not squeeze it into the shoe. She gave up and laughed at her sisters' efforts too. They tried to force their feet into the tiny glass shoe, but had failed. Cinderella stepped forward. The ugly sisters sneered, "You? But you were not even at the party." Cinderella slipped her foot into the glass shoe, and it fitted perfectly. Then she drew behind her back a second shoe, which she put on her other foot. At the same moment, the fairy godmother appeared and touched Cinderella with her wand. Instantly, her ragged clothes changed back into the beautiful shimmering dress, and Cinderella again became the lovely stranger. The delighted prince asked Cinderella to marry him, and Cinderella replied that there was nothing she would like more. The ugly sisters begged Cinderella to forgive them for their unkindness, and she happily agreed. There was a fine royal wedding for Cinderella and the prince, and they lived happily ever after. Finally, Cinderella's story ends very memorably. Thank you, little kids, for listening to this story. And hey, kids, if you like our stories, then don't forget to follow our podcast. Kids Candle comes back again with a new story. Until then, stay happy. Goodbye, little cutie pies.